Okay, welcome everyone. This is my first ever video, so hopefully this is going to work. But what I wanted to do is talk through Maude Clare with you. This is obviously one of Rossetti's poems in the set text, and it's also, I think, one that really well applies to A Doll's House. So, first things first, it was written in 1859, but then it wasn't published till 1862. Now, you don't really need to worry about that for the exam, about when it was written or when it was published, except to give you a general sense of when this took place in that timeline. It's good to have a sense of chronology. She was born in 1830, so she would have been about 29 when she wrote this. And we're quite lucky with Rossetti because her poor brother William, who was the one who had to get a job so all her siblings could be artists and whatnot, he kept extensive records of everything that they did, and we also have her notebook, so we actually know when she wrote this one, although for some of the texts we only know when they were published. So, Maude Clare. The general story of it is a ballad, and as you'll see in the PowerPoint, it kind of talks through why that's significant. The point to remember, this is literary context here, so you can think about the fact that the ballad form was very popular, generally folk stories, always had extensive dialogue and some sort of dramatic event. Now, for this exam, you don't need to worry about things like metre, rhythm, rhyme, unless you think there's something significant, because remember, you are thinking about comparing it back to A Doll's House. However, you might find that if something sticks out, for example, the usual ballad rhyme scheme is A, B, C, B, or A, B, A, B, if perhaps she decides to not follow that, what's the effect of it? And again, it's only really worth mentioning that if you're going to specifically link that to something from A Doll's House. So let's get started. The general story, as you probably know, is you've got Maude Clare, who is the ex-girlfriend of Thomas, and she disrupts the wedding day between him and Nell. So if we go through, first things first, out of the church he followed them with a lofty step and mien. His bride was like a village maid, Maude Clare was like a queen. So the first thing I would pick out is the idea that this was out of the church. So in other words, she was in the church to begin with. So if you imagine the slightly awkward scenario of being at your ex-boyfriend's wedding, also makes you wonder why this is after the ceremony. She didn't do that classic TV trope of standing up and interrupting. Well, I suppose you can think through why that is, but I would say she wanted to disrupt the marriage, not the wedding itself. I think the key word here is disruption, and that ties in quite nicely to A Doll's House. When you think about the marriage being disrupted, there are several elements in A Doll's House. Christina Linda's decision at the end of the play to let the Helmers find out the truth about their marriage is a disruption, or indeed Krogstad in their life is a disruption. So disruption is quite an interesting theme to consider. Anyway, so with a lofty step and mien, we've got the word lofty, which is, you imagine things sounds very high. Mien is sort of like your bearing, kind of how you hold yourself. So in other words, she's quite pretentious, I suppose, or, you know, that's not the right word. She looks good, she looks very regal. Then we straight away in this first stanza have the comparison between his bride and Maude Clare. So you've immediately got this antithesis between them. Interesting to note, his bride, she's not named here. You've got that possessive pronoun, which if you think back to A Doll's House, lots of that was about Torvald's obsessive kind of possession of Nora. So another link here. So if I'm writing ADH, it's a link to A Doll's House. So that possession. of your wife. Now remember, when this was written in 1859, this is before the 1870 Marriage Act, so the idea is that men were still seen as kind of owing their wives to an extent. Times were changing, but they wouldn't have been at this point. Of course, there were divorce laws that had come into play in the years beforehand, but this idea of the wife being kind of part of that husband's identity or his possessions is quite key. Anyway, back to the poem. So you've got again Maude Clare, and this really strong figure here, as she is in comparison to the bride, very, as I said, regal, so the lofty and the queen. Quite interesting to consider from that point of view. Now if you're interested in things like a Marxist reading of the poem, when you basically look at socioeconomic status, we have some hints here about a class difference, particularly the fact that Thomas, his mother is a lady, which we assume means that she's titled, and he is Lord as well, which again hints at his title. So you might wonder, the class difference appears to be that Nell is lower class to Maude Clare, which would raise the question of why is he not marrying Maude Clare, and of course we'll come see that in a second. So we jump straight into the dialogue then with the lady mother, and you've kind of got this sort of classic mother crying at the wedding thing, almost with tears. But what's quite interesting is if when you look at what she's actually saying, is this suggesting that they're not that happy. So his lady mother said with smiles, almost with tears, "May Nell and you but live as true as we have done for years." I think the interesting word there is true, which again is a real link to A Doll's House and that secret, and again the idea of the secret which causes the disruption to the Helmer's marriage, and indeed this secret which Maude Clare holds, and she's hoping presumably will disrupt this wedding as well. Now we start to get a hint that perhaps their marriage isn't that happy either. Your father 30 years ago had just your tale to tell. So is this suggesting that he also had a previous lover? It's not entirely clear. It is quite ambiguous. You've also got the question of, is this mother character, what's the word, ignorant, or does she secretly know what's going on? But either way, you then have another bit of antithesis here. Notice we had it in that first stanza and we've got it again. "But he was not so pale as you, nor I so pale with Nell." So you have this comparison between the generations. Of Thomas's parents and then he and Nell, and again that links very strongly with A Doll's House and this hereditary theme that we've had the whole way through, that you pass things down to your children. Of course Nora is frightened of passing her poisonous lies to her children, and the same way Rank physically had his disease passed down with his dad. So that's another key theme, as we'll see. Anyway, you've also got the word pale. You'll see I've circled them because it appears several times, and again it's a nice bit of kind of context to think about here. Just slight, obviously paleness was seen as beauty, well, for a woman I suppose. So Nell is pale because she's beautiful, so the mother's saying she's not as beautiful as Nell was. But also you've got pale suggesting he's either fearful or perhaps even ill. So perhaps the mother's looking at her son and saying, "Oh, he's got the pre-wedding jitters, just like my husband did," which, if she's ignorant, is quite sweet. However, maybe she's hinting that Thomas's father also had to make a choice between a lover and a marriage, and obviously made that particular choice. Anyway, so we then have this repeated word here, and again, as I said, the Lord, which might hint at the class difference. "My lord is pale with inward strife," so you can see he is feeling very stressed. Perhaps it's because he noticed Maude Clare following him. "Nell was pale with pride," and again I think that's a really interesting link here to the class difference between them. The she may not be, as we see, the village maid she may not be of a high class, but she has secured this marriage. And if you think about women at the time, if you were middle class, this was a way of ensuring your security. Just while I'm on that subject, actually, obviously maid means young woman, but it also hints at the fact that she is a virgin, which obviously is a key point to make here, and we'll come back to that later. Think about Torvald and his virgin bride as well, another slightly creepy connection. Anyway, so now was pale with pride, my lord, again that repetition of my lord. Now obviously the narrator, or the speaker I suppose, seems sort of like a third person narrator. Interesting that they keep calling him my lord, but again perhaps that's suggesting his status within the community. Either way, my lord gazed long on pale Maude Clare, or ever, which basically means before he kissed the bride. Now, two things that could mean. One, a pre-existing relationship between Maude Clare and Thomas. Or two, he saw her in the church. Either way, you can see why he's pale. He's obviously worried. Now, what's interesting is we then have this dialogue coming in. And what's really interesting is it doesn't actually say Maude Clare here, it just says she said. And so when you first read it, it might not be clear who's speaking. But anyway, lo, I have brought my gift, my lord, have brought my gift. Notice that repetition there. Again, sounds nice, doesn't it? Turn up to your ex-partner's wedding, bring a gift. But of course, as we'll see, not quite the case. Now, the other thing I would circle, again, think about the class difference here, but also it suggests this politeness. And that suggests the idea of keeping up appearances. Which again is a real key link to A Doll's House. Think about Torvald when he discovers the letter and he tells Nora that she can live in the house, but their marriage will be ended. Right, I'm just gonna get a bit closer to the last stanza. Oh, sorry. There we go. Anyway, I think this is quite a key section here. So, I've brought my gift, my lord, have brought my gift, she said. So again, this idea of a gift, technically she's physically brought something, but of course, is her gift the disruption itself? We'll see. Anyway, to bless the hearth, to bless the board, to bless the marriage bed. Now, hearth is that link to the stove, which again is a key theme in A Doll's House. And this hint at the warmth and security. Oh, I'll write that so you can't see it. The warmth and security of the family and the marriage. You will notice that lots of times in A Doll's House, Nora goes towards the stove. There's lots of references to the warmth of the house and the stove, and then that's contrasted with the coldness outside. So the hearth was always seen as being kind of the centre of the home. So it kind of symbolises the health and security of that home. You've then got the board. And my understanding of this is it's kind of the sort of the food sustenance. So again, a part of a healthy home is that you're able to provide. If you think about if you go on a full board or half board holiday, I suppose, I guess we still sort of use that word in that sense. Also it makes me think of cheese board, which is nice but possibly not relevant. Anyway, and then the final one, which is lovely to kind of throw in at the end there, the marriage bed. Now, of course, she's thinking about sex. She's also thinking about future children, which again is a slight link here to that hereditary thing and this idea that she's kind of cursing them with her thanks, and therefore is also cursing any future children that might come as a result of the marriage bed. And of course, to bless these things is quite sweet, I suppose, in a wedding, although it's slightly inappropriate today. But I'm sure at the time perhaps it wasn't. But for this to be coming from an ex-lover, again, suggests the disruption that she is causing.